They say we're loud, opinionated, afraid, telling us to hush, dim our historical light. But darlings, we're the heartbeat, sharp and keen, unveiling the truth behind the silver screen.
History harpies, hear us roar. Through the ages we explore. Fashion, film, and TV's lore. Spilling tea, wanting more.
Hi, and welcome to History Harpies.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Christine. And this is episode 6, which is actually part 2 of episode 5, in a sense.
We are very, very excited to be back after somewhat of a hiatus. It took us a little while to reconvene, even though we had two-parter. Both of us took some trips and have been regrouping, but we have lots more to say about the texts that we started a conversation about last week. This week, however, we will be focusing on characters losing their virginity and the arcs of virginity loss that go through our two forever texts, the movie American Pie and our Fast Times at Ridgemont High analysis.
So we are going to be then revisiting some of the things we talked about last time and introducing some new things and trying to figure out why virginity seems to be such an important component of at least the high school experience in American media. But before we do that, Lauren, let's actually talk about our weeks, our time, since, as you say, we haven't been together for a while. And we're actually going to talk and start with some harps and loves this time around.
So my love, which is incorporated into my hiatus, is the city of Boston, which I was visiting this past week. Not only the city of Boston, but the beautiful town of Scituate, which is a coastal town about 50 miles outside of Boston. And I just have to tell you that I felt all the love in Boston from people I knew, people I didn't know, archivists, my college roommate who I got the pleasure to spend a lot of time with, the shops, the food. The weather's a little wonky, but anything better than the heat, which we are now dealing with here. And I just give tons of love to Boston. I miss my time there, and it reminded me of all the good things of being, again, the same age as many of these characters that we're talking about today, but also such a lovely, manageable city and such a good vibe. And I also, a shout out to Boston public transportation. It is the only place I know where you can get to the airport for free.
Which is very important.
So again, many, many thanks to my former roommate forever, who hosted me, and then also all the great archivists who really helped me through at Boston University in working on this new book. So it was all the good, happy things. And I probably had a record in that I did not buy anything when I was in Boston.
How is that possible?
I didn't buy any clothes. The only thing I bought, I'm not going to include like an extra phone charger or like candy absolutely. Or something like that, but I did not buy any clothes. And that took a tremendous amount of willpower, but I also had a tiny suitcase. And I was very aware that I just had a limited amount of space and was going to enter into the no buy, as they do on TikTok, no buy campaign. So I'm on it.
Well, I'm glad you had a fantastic time, and props to New England. Did you go to a Boston Red Sox game?
Did not.
Oh, sad.
Did not.
Sad.
I know, it is sad. It is sad. And I would have, the weather was kind of rainy. So no Red Sox. But as you know, I'm a Phillies fan anyway.
I know.
And I will go to a Phillies game when I am in Philly, which will be soon. So nice. I'm okay. And maybe they'll play the Red Sox.
And maybe they will play the Red Sox. Well, my love for this week, and I didn't spend a lot of time doing this. As you know, I was traveling with my kids, which was fantastic, although very rainy. But I reintroduced myself this week to Clinton Kelly and Stacy London from What Not to Wear. Not personally, but they have a new show.
You didn't have them over?
No, I did not have them over for drinks or to discuss my wardrobe, which I should have. But they have a new show on Amazon called Wear Whatever the F You Want. And so it's a makeover show with a really interesting twist. The twist being that they are not trying to mold the client into a particular model or particular clothes, but the client says, this is what I want to look like, and they help the client achieve that. And they've had a really interesting diversity of clients on the show so far, and wonderful, wonderful clothes and shoes and accessories to look at, a lot of clothes porn. So I'm really enjoying that. And it's great just to see Clinton and Stacy together because I always love them as hosts.
So was there a particular outfit that inspired you?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the clients wanted to look more like a visionary artist. And she had a great outfit that was mixing of patterns, which is something I never do in my own clothes because I feel like that's very intimidating to know how to mix patterns well. But she had a great combination of jacket and shirt and pants, all of which were different patterns. And she looked incredible. It just really terrific. And so something else that's great about the show, shout out again to Clinton and Stacy, is they have little tips, little helpful tips for one's own wardrobe. And it made me want to buy clothes, basically. You did not buy clothes in Boston. It made me want to buy clothes, which is always a great thing.
It is a great thing. Wanting to buy clothes and buying clothes is always a great thing. But mixing patterns well is a tough feat. And,
very.
Something I cannot pull off. No. And I'm gonna watch. I know you've recommended. So this actually segues into another show that we both watched one episode of, which moves into our virginity theme, which is Virgins, which I couldn't help but thinking that there should be a fashion makeover component that should have gone with the Virgin episode.
Completely agree.
Because if the Queer Eyes or Clinton Stacy or those universe makeover people were to come and help the virgins out, feel like it wasn't just a sexual and psychological problem. There was also a fashion component that needed to be addressed.
So what would be ideal in the case of this show Virgins is if they brought over makeover people and a sex worker.
Correct.
That would be part of the glam squad.
Which is what my husband said.
And he is correct. So this is a new show, a very new show that is being streamed on Max, but I think is also on TLC, which of course TLC sometimes really scrapes the bottom of reality shows. But this show focuses on 4 people, all of whom I think are in their 30s. Oh, one is early 40s.
Yes.
One is early 40s.
One is
You're right.
is 42 years old, who has been divorced.
Divorced. So a divorced virgin. So they're all virgins, and as you would imagine, the show is going down a path of trying, I think, to help them to lose their virginity. And the obvious solution, again, being sex worker, as Dan Savage would recommend. So we'll see if there are any sex workers in the show's future. But, of course, as comes out in the show, what is so strange about this is their age, because we do tend to have a sense that one's virginity loss maybe is kind of like a high school, college thing. Is that fair to say, Lauren?
I think it depends on the individual, but yes, I think the normative range, definitely by 30 is something, and again, different for everyone.
Different choices.
Different traditions, life stages, choices, sexualities, preferences, changes, all of that. But 42 years old and divorced, is an interesting spot to be in.
It is. And of course, we won't spend any time talking about it now, but everyone remembers the 40-year-old virgin, and that this was very much understood, right? Presented comedically as something that had kind of never happened to Steve Carell's character. And so in terms of media and culture, right, we absolutely think of this as a young person's thing, the loss of virginity. And so maybe actually let's start talking about forever. Let's go back to both of our forevers. So if anyone remembers, the last time Lauren and I spoke, we discussed Judy Blume's original novel, Forever, about Michael and Catherine falling in love in their senior year in high school, and the more recent television show, also called Forever, about Keisha and Justin falling in love their senior year in high school. And we discussed some of the similarities and differences of those two things. Let's talk, Lauren, about virginity in both of our Forevers.
Okay. Well, the biggest difference to me, even though both couples have sex and someone in the couple is a virgin in these pairs, the biggest difference is that with Michael and Catherine, there is this, as we said in the last episode, compressed timeline of just about 4 months. Catherine is telling her story, and we are joining her in sexual discovery where she is getting ready to have sex for the first time. We know that is coming. We know she has met the person she plans to have sex with, and we see incrementally how they physically connect, how they emotionally connect, and that when the sex does happen, it's something that is very, very meaningful to them, but then we see them kind of settling into a sexual relationship. And sexuality is at the center of the book in a way that the new series, it definitely portrays sexuality between the characters, but it is not the central storyline of their relationship. It's something that does happen, and then it happens, throughout the course of the relationship, but because the timeline of the relationship is so much longer, the focus isn't on virginity loss.
Yes, and so we don't see, as you say, the development really of sort of sexual rapport between Keisha and Justin in the same way that we do with Michael and Catherine, right? It's very much dwelt upon that Michael and Catherine end up having a very mature sexual relationship, right? In the sense that she gets to the point where she's orgasmic fairly quickly, that it is this very profound component of their relationship. And we also have a sense on the other side, I don't know if you would agree with me on this, that it's not that Michael is pressuring Catherine to have sex, but because he himself is not a virgin, there absolutely is this notion that he would like it to happen as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Right? Whereas with Justin and Keisha, they are both virgins.
Right.
But in a sense, Justin... Maybe ironically, Justin is not depicted as being super, super eager to kind of get through it.
Well, the series is about so many other things. College admissions, the sex tape with Keisha,
the parents.
So many other storylines that the sex between the two, when it happens, it's a nice moment, but it certainly isn't something that the show is sort of grounded upon, that grows, that they explore. We assume after that their sex life is an active one, but the book really takes the reader at a granular level through different levels of discovery, different levels of openness, and also, as you say, Michael's eagerness to have sex with Catherine and her different, what she's comfortable with at different times and how she ultimately comes to the decision. The other thing that the book captures is these young lovers trying to find places to have sex. That certainly by the second half of the book, these two people are just fucking wherever. Mainly in Michael's sister's apartment. They go on a ski trip, other things, but there isn't anything else going on. They're not talking about going to concerts. They're not talking about going to the mall. They're certainly not talking about their college essays in ways that Keisha and Justin are. And of course, because the parents are playing a much lesser role in the Forever book, we don't know the whole story of the father and the chef and the brother and the uncle and all the people that we come into contact with in the series.
Okay, but is it fair to say that, thinking about what you just said, and thinking about these differences, is it fair to say that so the book Forever and the show, they really do summarize in a shockingly accurate way ideas of teenage sexuality at their respective times. So Forever, right, we have, and we talked about this a little bit last time, we have Catherine being super responsible about birth control, right? She goes to Planned Parenthood.
Right.
As you say, there's this incremental development of their sexual relationship. And in fact, they go from first base to home plate, to use that kind of language. And as we just said, right?
Or is it a grand slam?
A grand slam. And so there's this sense of sexual maturity, but it is really compartmentalized, right? It's compartmentalized. It's their relationship. It is shown as being very emotionally deep. But then with Justin and Keisha, it summarizes, I think, this moment so well in that it is so ironic and kind of back-asswards, right? In that we have a virgin with a sex tape. Right. So much of the attention in the show is on this sex tape.
So much.
But she's a virgin. So Justin thinks that she is more sexually experienced than she is. In some ways, not surprisingly, because she has a sex tape that has been circulated.
Well,
although not, of course, of her having intercourse, but of her performing oral sex on a boy.
And she also attempts to perform oral sex on Justin on their first date.
On their first date. In public. In a movie theater. In a movie theater.
So it's not a crazy idea.
It's not a crazy idea.
In his mind that Keisha isn't a virgin and is quite experienced.
Yes, but this is the crazy irony, right, which I do think sort of sums up how we talk about sort of high school sexuality now. The idea that sort of you have a kind of world of porn and the sex tape that at the same time is coexisting with this bizarre kind of, I don't want to say bizarre, but this chastity.
Yes.
Right? And that these two things kind of don't, so Michael and Catherine, right, we would never have kind of porn on the table, right? It's its own other thing, right? It exists in this kind of skeevy world someplace else that we don't know about, but they do have a very mature sexual relationship. Whereas Justin and Keisha, we have the porn, the sex tapes, their kind of fumblings towards sex, and then also the incredible involvement of the parents, right? And as you said earlier, Michael and Catherine's parents just really non-entities, right? They're sneaking around to try to find the good places to have sex. But then, of course, we have the weirdness in the show, which we talked about last time, that Justin's parents basically are going to tell Keisha's mother about the sex tape. And so you have, again, this unbelievable irony, right, again, of this kind of immersion in sexuality. At the same time, you have all of this chastity in sort of Gen Z or whatever.
There
if
is
that makes
this
any sense.
omission in Forever. The losing of virginity is a very big deal that Catherine talks about internally and that she wrestles with, and it's something that we can internalize in a concrete way. And in the series, it's Justin's dad just throws a condom at him, and
go for it.
We don't, although we definitely get Keisha having conversations with her mother about not getting pregnant, there aren't any conversations about the loss of virginity.
Yeah.
And there aren't any conversations between the two of them other than, oh, neither one of us has done it before and we're kind of nervous. And that's really the only real conversation the two of them have until they do have sex. When they do have sex, they do. There isn't a conversation before. It's going to happen, and she's been waiting to see him, and she goes to Martha's Vineyard and
tracks him down,
and he's been listening to these voicemails, and there's a heightened sense of anticipation. But on the other hand, the actual loss of virginity is not something that is explored in detail between the two of them. What it will mean to them, what it will mean to their relationship, and then what things will look like in months to come. Because they go from having sex and having pretty good sex, as far as we can tell. It's not awkward. It's something that is seen as mutually fulfilling. And then they're having sex in the car, and they're having sex in the pool, and so they're in a sexual relationship, which presumably lasts for another 10 months or something like that. So by the time that the show ends, virginity has sort of been a non-issue. Whereas with Catherine, of course, it's an issue because she has had sex with Michael, and then the first guy she even looks at, she feels is a betrayal, and she can't be in these two relationships, and so for her, sex is something that ends the relationship, actually, and may allow her to start another. But for Keisha and Justin, it is, again, it becomes a non-entity in some ways. The actual conversation about virginity.
Okay, so is it then fair to say that, in fact, and it's not surprising, that in Judy Blume's book, we have a shockingly romantic view of sexuality. I think one of the most interesting things about the book, as opposed to the series, and this goes along with what you're saying, is that there very much is the sense that entering into the sexual relationship will propel the relationship into an emotional space, right? When Catherine's mom says, you can't go back to holding hands, right? Once you sort of take the step. And that it is plunging you, no pun intended, plunging you into all of these particular moments of emotional depth and vulnerability. And we absolutely see that, right? And that's part of the reason then why when she meets Theo and she's like, oh my God, I'm attracted to someone else, I have to end this other relationship. But with Justin and Keisha, there, again, really isn't a sense that having the relationship become a sexual one is propelling them into greater emotional vulnerability. And in part, it's like, well, okay, she was going to go down on him in a movie theater on their first date, so who knows, right? Again, the whole
all kinds
landscape.
of Alanis Morissette.
Exactly.
But again, I would say because the show is focused on so many other issues, and the college admission, Justin, essay, ADHD of it all really takes over the sexual part of it that could have been. And they're in a relationship, and there's questions about whether they'll stay together or whether they'll visit in college, whether they'll go to the same college, but all of those issues really become much more paramount than the sexual content of their relationship.
So we have that. I've actually already forgotten. Who breaks up with whom at the end of... He breaks up with her right at the end of Forever the series.
He breaks up with her because he feels that he cannot really find himself. He's basically living for her. His only goal is her, and that he decides not to go to Northwestern, to defer admission, to do the record producing, to work at CVS, to basically take a gap year and find himself, because he had offered to go to Howard with her, and she's like, no, I want to do my own thing. I want to do my own thing, right? So that... He breaks it off, but she's like, look, if you're going to end this thing, then you need to end it for a reason and end it for you. And I choose myself, right?
Speaking of Samantha, anyway.
Right. Well, and also some 90210 references. I believe Brenda chooses herself when she goes to England. So
I can't believe, actually, we didn't even think to talk about Brenda losing her virginity in 90210.
At the prom.
At the prom.
This all goes with our episode. I don't know how we forgot.
How? And I was just thinking about Shannon Doherty yesterday. Very sad about Shannon Doherty. But of course, one of that episode, we might as well talk about it for a second now. That episode, of course, was so shocking, right, and widely credited as the episode that propelled 90210 into the stratosphere in terms of popularity.
And a legion of dresses. I wore that dress to my prom.
Really?
Yes. The black dress with the white puffy sleeves. I wore it.
And of course, that was very much presented, right, as the ideal.
Yes.
Right. So you're at your prom, you're super dressed up,
right.
Your date/boyfriend is super hot,
right.
But he's also incredibly thoughtful, incredibly considerate, right? And Brenda even says afterwards, I can't imagine what it would be like to do this for the first time, not with someone that I loved. Right.
And not at like the Beverly Hills Hotel or wherever they were.
Wherever they are. So, wait, so here's then a question about Forever the series, and then maybe we can start talking about some of our other virginity losses. So, would Forever the series be any different if the sexual component was totally missing? Right. If it were not, if we just maybe saw them, make out every once in a while. So if the whole, we are quote unquote losing our virginity to each other, if that simply didn't exist, really would we be missing out?
Or if they were both not virgins and had sex and we knew they were having sex, but that was just another component of a relationship. I don't think it would have been that different. Because, again, the moment of their first sexual encounter, well, there's the moment in the apartment where they first sort of try to have sex and are not successful. And that's where he discovers she's a virgin and she's nervous and he's nervous. And so that's, they're fumbling and they're kind of talking through it. But then from that to the time that they have sex, there isn't any progression or discussion. And so it sort of feels like that scene, which was very natural and normal and normalizing for high schoolers to see that, in some ways was a waste, because the next scene is the Brenda and Dylan. And it's very romantic, and he has this
beautiful barn and Martha's Vineyard.
Right, and he set up a bed and there's the lights and the sex itself is fabulous as far as we can
tell.
So it, in a lot of ways, it almost discredits what came before. And
I agree.
And had the Martha's Vineyard sex happened initially, it really would have, the series would have been the same.
I agree with that. And I think that it's, in some ways, it's a lost opportunity. But as you have pointed out, there are so many other things. Right, that show is so stuffed to the gills with all of these other dynamics and issues.
Despite being so long.
And really, I'll say again, could have been shorter. I think we could have trimmed, right, a lot of that. But obviously, wanting to do something very different from what Forever wanted to do, right, as I think we discussed before. Judy Blume very pointedly wanted to write a book that was about a sexual relationship that failed. Right, to show to her daughter that was possible. That it doesn't have to be, you're going to marry this guy forever. And so very much, I think, fulfills that. And, okay, let's actually start talking about a very different sort of product about...
One thing before we leave forever,
it sounds like we've been doing forever,
is also that Forever the book was for so long the book that people read under the covers, that libraries had censored, that really was this taboo book because it obviously had so much sex in it, but it was a very natural story about high schoolers having sex for the first time. And I think the fact that Judy Blume and other producers wanted to make it again in this sort of, well, it's in 2025, but 2018 world really speaks to the fact that the initial core of what that book was supposed to be about may no longer be something, it's either not taboo or it's something that people are still uncomfortable talking about, and therefore we have to talk about these other things that we talk a lot about in other content, right? We talk a lot about race, we talk a lot about urban life, we talk a lot about inequalities of all sorts, masculinity, those sorts of things. And it would have been interesting to have had the series stay truer to the original, if only for the fact that it was so taboo for so long. In some ways, to sort of bring it out of the darkness.
I agree. And that to me goes back to the earlier point about the incredible irony, right, about this moment in terms of teen sexuality.
Yes.
That again, you have this sex... I mean, I absolutely don't think that it could be made, right, in a very faithful way. For exactly the reason that you're saying. It's still taboo. It's still understood to be, again, sort of too explicit, too shocking. But the idea, again, that we have a world in which it is too shocking, too taboo, but again, we have access to porn through the internet, through phones, again, the idea of the sex tape in the plot, that to me is just so bonkers, right? It's just so inconsistent and bizarre. And I mean, really, I think sums up our moment in such a bizarre and disturbing and really worrisome way.
It is. It is a very uneven level of sexual literacy when teenagers hear all kinds of podcasts, are exposed to all kinds of porn, understand all kinds of fetishes and kinks, and see all kinds of arrangements and, you know, things like that, but do not have a basic understanding of, again, getting to know someone, having a first encounter with somebody, and what that looks like. And dating on, again, a pretty basic level of just going to the movies, and going out to eat, and hanging out with friends, having friend groups, but rather DMing and texting and blocking and breaking up, talking, and then it is wild. It is a wild disparity that is hard to kind of wrap your head around sometimes.
It's back to and this is going to be a great segue. It's back to what you mentioned in an earlier episode about all of the guidelines for prom. Right. And we asked at the time, how can anyone possibly, like Brenda, run off and lose their virginity at prom if there's so many guidelines and parent chaperones at prom? Which does take us to the next thing we were going to talk about, which is the 1999 film American Pie. Absolutely a movie, I think we would agree, that would not and could not be made today. And very much was in the train of sort of sex comedies of the 80s or something like Porky's and the million other things that were made in the late 70s and 1980s about teenagers who wanted to get laid.
I believe there is a movie called Losing It.
There is. And you know what? Actually, we, again, don't have to talk about it now.
No.
But I'm realizing right now, my favorite film about a teenager trying to get laid for the first time is Risky Business.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely a classic. Yes. One of my hands down favorite films ever. And where there is a sex worker, right? To help our hero, Tom Cruise, lose his virginity.
I feel like we keep coming back to our first episode.
We do. Where is Honora in all of this?
Where is Honora?
Where is the sassy sex worker? Of course, the sex worker in Risky Business ends up being, sort of a con person. Anyway, we won't talk about Risky Business now. But so American Pie, again, 1999, where there had been, I think it's fair to say, maybe a lull in those kind of sex comedy movies in the 1990s. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it really is sort of wonderfully funny and risque. It's about a group of guy friends they're in Michigan. Right? Suburban Michigan. A group of guy friends, all of whom want to lose their virginity by the end of their senior year in high school. And when the film begins, we are centered on maybe the least likely of the group to lose his virginity, and that is Jim, played by Jason Biggs, the main character of American Pie. But there's a whole group of friends, right? We have a bunch of his guy friends who are in this kind of pact, and then the various women who are also in the orbit.
Right. And some of the women are already in relationships with this guy group, and some of these guys are on a mission to find new women to fulfill their pact with. So it's charming and raunchy all at the same time. Really terrific performances by Biggs, particularly by Eugene Levy, who plays his father, and many of the supporting characters who are, even though they are in real life much older than high school students, really do a great job at capturing the silliness and the insanity of senior year and of these stupid arrangements that people make to try to have sex. And then some of these sort of frenemies and different kinds of dynamics within the friendships between these four guys. And then the women that they pursue. And they pursue women at different levels. And again, Jim being this sort of central character, he tries to romance this exchange student,
this gorgeous exchange student,
who ends up being way more up for things than he thought she would be, and the whole thing gets caught on camera, and somehow I don't remember what the technology was back then, but
they have a little like a setup webcam on.
They didn't have phones. How did people see it?
People see it because the little webcam that they have is physically attached to the computer. And it's basically going through a modem. And that's how they can see, yes. The ancient technology of the modem. Okay. That's how they are seeing,
people see this video, it goes viral, right?
Jim of Nadia basically naked initially in his room.
And Jim just completely
messing it up.
And then Nadia gets deported.
I don't remember that.
The ice moment comes in American Pie.
I totally forgot
Yeah, she gets deported because of the sex tape.
Okay, I completely blacked that out somehow.
That's a 2025 moment in back in history. Anyway, there's that. There's, again, all kinds of shenanigans, harkening back to Porky's. I mean, again, Jim has sex with an actual pie. And in one of the funniest scenes of that film. But you see all kinds of stupidity and all kinds of mayhem going on with these guys. And by the end of it, they all do find women, although in different ways, and some almost by accident. What's his name? Chris Cooper.
Chris Klein?
Chris Klein.
Yes, Chris Cooper
from American Beauty, right? Chris Klein, who plays Oz, he is a kind of jock lacrosse guy. He falls in love with this choir chick played by Mina Suvari, and they actually end up falling in love, and he turns into sort of an a cappella guy himself, and they work out.
And that's one of the really interesting things about the film, right? Is that all of the guys are in very different sort of romantic and sexual situations, right? So Jim, again, looks to be the least promising. Oz looks to be this kind of jock, and he ends up, as you say, with Heather, who's this super sweet and played by Mina Suvari, very, very pretty sort of singer, this kind of from a very different sort of social group. And then we have Stifler, this super raunchy kind of classic asshole, and he's sort of not quite in that central friend group, right?
But he's in the lax Oz universe.
Yes, that sort of jockey space.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you have Jim, where it looks super unpromising. And then you have an actual established couple, Kevin and Vicky. And so that is really, to me, the most depressing scenario, because Kevin and Vicky are a stable couple, much like Justin and Keisha. They are thinking about what's going to happen next year when Vicky goes off to Cornell, or wherever she's going. I think it was Cornell. And so,
no, I think he goes to Cornell. And I think she goes to Ithaca. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should have looked this up.
Yeah.
Because for some reason I just have in my head, how funny that Tara Reid was going to be going to Cornell. But they are a stable couple. They're trying to decide what to do. And he very much is pressuring her to have sex because they're in a stable romantic relationship, but they're not having sex.
Right.
And so his component of this whole pact to lose their virginity is that he basically ends up pressuring his girlfriend, his reluctant girlfriend, in a lot of ways to have sex.
And also that Tara Reid is insistent, as she tells her friend Natasha Lyonne's character Jessica, that she has to feel that he loves her. He has to tell her. She has to hear it. She has to hear that he loves her, or she cannot have sex with him. And he doesn't know whether he does, and he doesn't know whether he's ready to say this. So there's a tension above just the pressuring. It's not just the pressuring to have sex, but it's also a question of whether these two are in love, or whether at least he's willing to say he's in love, even if he doesn't mean it.
Yes. If in fact he is that craven, right, that he will tell his girlfriend that he loves her solely in order to lose his virginity.
Right.
And that it is so public, right? And that's another component of this, is that all of these guys are consistently discussing their progress or lack thereof. Right. And so one of the really sort of fantastic parts of the end is that when Oz and Heather do have sex, he will not tell his friends, right? He leaves them with the impression that he has not lost his virginity.
Right.
By just saying something like, we spent wonderful time together.
I
and
think
she's really
he said
special.
didn't work out this time.
Oh, I
and,
don't remember
like,
that.
Maybe next time.
Yeah,
I think
because one of his guy friends definitely says that. Like, oh, sorry, it kind of didn't work out for you.
Right.
And so he very much is shown to be a gentleman.
Yes.
Right. Where he is someone who does have sex.
Right.
But again, sort of treasures this brand new relationship with
Yes.
Heather. And so isn't just kind of kiss and tell.
Right. And on the other end of that, we have the two funniest scenes, the one between Finch and Stifler's mom, played by the wonderful Jennifer Coolidge.
Looking gorgeous.
Looking amazing.
Gorgeous.
And coming in and seeing this young 18-year-old guy in her basement alone and seducing him, and can call back to
The Graduate
very
specifically,
and play the music, and it's hilarious and very unexpected, and again leads to Finch's obsession actually with Stifler's mom, but also the fact that Finch and Stifler have become such enemies by the end of this movie, and that they're playing pranks on one another, and they're trying to discredit one another, and so it's the ultimate betrayal that Stifler's mom has sex with Finch. And then you have the Jason Biggs character Jim, who does ultimately have sex with his band girl Michelle, who he thinks is just going to be a sort of lost cause and just a date, and there's no way
the night's done for.
There's no way that this girl is up for anything, and she turns out to be
a sex maniac,
super horny, and doing all sorts of stuff at band camp, and he learns that she's up for anything.
She's up for anything. And this, of course, it almost approaches the level of a twist, right? That consistently she has been shown to us and to Jim as being, as you say, right, super geeky, going to band camp, and then we have this sense that she's a wild woman. And so it's funny because Jim ends up with this kind of happy ending, right?
Yes.
Not in a romantic sense, like we see with Oz and Heather.
No.
Although eventually, right, in subsequent sequels, Jim and Michelle have a relationship.
They get married.
They get married. But very much this sense of like, this is a win, right? That he is so dejected, right? We have seen him through all of these humiliations,
yes,
including with Nadia, including the relationship with the pie, the warm apple pie,
right?
And that then he does have kind of a win. So all of them, right, end up losing their virginity, but in not just radically different ways, but with different kind of emotional levels,
and also different kinds of physical satisfaction. Because as we learn in the second movie, Jim just sucks. He's terrible.
He's terrible.
Terrible.
Doesn't know how to kiss.
No idea what to do. And that Michelle becomes his tutor, pretty much his sexual tutor in the second movie.
Looking forward to Nadia coming back.
And by the end, of course, he's no longer interested in Nadia, and he's in love with Michelle. Yeah. But that some of them know what they're doing, some of them don't know what they're doing, and some of them are with women who know a little more, Stifler's mom mainly, but there are different levels of experience and different levels of awkwardness, which, going back to what we just talked about with Forever, gives a larger spectrum of the possibilities for these people in high school. And again, the Brenda and Dylan, to go back to that sequence, we never see anything but, again, flowers and birds and angels coming. We don't see any awkwardness there.
We don't.
And we do see a lot of awkwardness, particularly with the Kevin and Vicky sex scene.
Which is so depressing.
Which is really depressing.
It's very sad.
And,
genuinely sad.
And you don't know whether they mean it when they say they love one another. Or they love one another on a platonic level or on a friendship level or something like that. But we don't want to know whether they truly love one another in a romantic sense.
And there's my takeaway was always that this is a sad kind of coda to the relationship, right? That the relationship is over,
right?
That it is over, and so yes, instead of again being this kind of very romantic beginning, right? As we see with Oz and Heather, or even sort of a fun thing like what Jim experiences or Finch and Stifler's mom, there is this sense of like that having sex, there's nothing joyful about it, right? There's nothing that has brought them closer, that the opposite has happened, right? That the having sex is kind of this exclamation point on the fact that this relationship is basically over.
And if we move to the second film for Kevin, if I'm remembering correctly, he thinks that having sex with Vicky in the first movie will lead to experience in college and a more fulfilling sex life in college, which it doesn't.
It does not.
He is continually either unfulfilled or it's not really working out. He doesn't really date very many people. And he sees her at a party and she has a boyfriend, and that's very, very depressing. So it doesn't have the end goal that he thinks it will.
Which is a really interesting, I think, moral lesson. And to me, that's one of the most interesting components of that whole storyline. In a movie that is basically a super raunchy sex comedy.
Yes.
Right? We have this overall arc of this particular character who pressures his girlfriend into sex, who, it seems, is willing to say, I love you, just in order to get laid. And again, envisions, as you say, this kind of sexual paradise when he goes to college as an experienced person, not a virgin. And it all falls apart, right? There's no sense that he has developed any kind of emotional tools, right? His technical maturity is only sexual, right? Whereas again, as you say, Vicky has gone off, right? She has a relationship with a guy in college. And so he is absolutely sort of stunted. And I've always thought, again, that was such a, subtle, but really effective thing to do with that character. Again, amid all of the raunchiness and the fact that we are rooting for them all to get laid.
We are.
Right? I mean, very much.
But the raunchiness of that film, which in some ways to me kind of mirrors Bridesmaids. Because or some, there's some of the other films that are The Hangover, where you have all of these scenes of raunch, or these scenes of extreme hilarity ensues, right? But then at the core of it, there are these really deep emotional questions that need to be answered. And here they're about these four characters, and again, what their longer journeys are going to be, but what kind of intimacy are they capable of? And again, not to go to a totally different movie, but Bridesmaids had a lot to do with the friendship between the two characters, and what happens when your best friend does get married, and the kind of loss that you mourn, and that sort of thing. And so that's why I think that American Pie does such a great job, and again, on the surface level, seeming like a Porky's, or seeming like one of those 80s movies that, again, Losing It, or Weird Science,
Last American Virgin, Weird Science, Risky Business.
And again, Risky Business has a lot of content to it as well.
It's a great film.
It is a great film. But American Pie, I think at the moment that it came out, was so popular, and again, then it had, four of them?
Yeah,
there are four American Pies, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
leading to a wedding, and then a reunion.
A reunion. A reunion.
It became very popular because I think people really related to not to those characters, to those friendships, but also to those four different versions of what sex could be, what high school could be, what the end of high school could be, and all those things.
And of course, you mentioned earlier the Eugene Levy character, Jim's dad. And of course, one of the other super appealing things about those films, and especially the first one, is that you have this father who is so awkward, right? Keeps doing these bizarre things. Right. And obviously, I mean, Eugene Levy is so incredibly funny. But there's this unbelievable sort of tenderness, right, in that relationship, where it's very much that the dad is on his side, right? He wants Jim to have this experience, but not in this kind of Justin in Forever, right? The dad throwing him condoms and saying, like, here, take care of it, son, go for it. And I think that really does hit this sweet spot, because you do, again, have this very awkward dad in a stable marriage, right? In a stable marriage to Jim's mom. But the idea that, this kind of sort of boys will be boys, but in a very different way. Right. Because everything is in the sense of awkwardness, in the sense of sort of be responsible, and in the sense of, like, we're all just going to kind of screw this up and do these sort of daffy things.
But you also get the sense that Eugene Levy himself, as a high school student, was a Jim.
Exactly.
And you do not get the sense that Justin's dad was a Justin.
No, absolutely not.
Everything that Eugene Levy says comes through so genuinely, because you can see him sort of remembering through his son what it was like, and cringing at these things that are happening, while at the same time feeling so much pathos and wanting to be there for his son, but at the same time not wanting to push him into anything that he is uncomfortable with or not ready for. And it's really sweet. but at the same time, there's not a lot of words exchanged.
Yeah.
There's no like big sit down talk, except for
except for things that are awkward, right? And
except for things that are awkward.
Yes.
When
when
and
looking at board mags together, anyway.
right. There's so much physical comedy as well.
Yes.
In all of the American Pie movies, there's whether it's the pie, whether it's the second one where he's caught doing, I think he's like jerking off and he glues himself to himself.
Yeah.
It's like so horrible. Which reminds me of there's something about Mary happening.
Oh
in that too,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And again, Eugene Levy is who he calls, and it's like calling your dad, and you're in this incredibly awkward, embarrassing situation. But Eugene Levy has been there.
Yes.
It doesn't, at least whether it happens on screen or not, but we know he's been there.
He has been there.
We know he gets it. And also that these other guys are like, your dad's pretty cool. Your dad gets it. And it's a very sweet relationship.
Yeah, it really, and I think that the movie just absolutely would not have worked without it.
No.
Right. And it is just then another moment, much like again Oz and Heather, right, where you really do have this kind of tenderness, right? This sweetness amid the raunchy sex comedy, which just, I think, I mean, it sounds so ridiculous to say it elevates it, but it really does. But thinking also in terms of moment, before we maybe start talking about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. So would it even be possible now, right, to have a film about high schoolers, even thinking of Forever as a series, where say we see Nadia in effect, who's supposed to be a high school, senior.
Right.
Almost fully nude, right, in that film.
Right.
And something else where, is it even
and
possible?
Everyone is watching.
And everyone is watching, right? Jim runs
she
over to the
has
opposite.
not consented
She has
to
not
everyone
consented
watching.
this. Yes.
She has consented certainly to have sex with Jim, potentially.
Yes, potentially. But she's in the room kind of touching herself naked while all of these guys are watching her, right, across the town.
Which Jim has advertised is going to happen.
Yes, and so we have this early kind of sex tape, right, much like Keisha's sex tape. But I think it is so, I mean, even again thinking, all right, how could you even have a rated R film, right, about high schoolers, naked high schoolers, having sex now? Like, in what possible cultural landscape of the United States in 2025 is that even possible?
Well, apparently we can only have naked women in Anora.
Yes, but they are not high schoolers.
But she's not a high schooler.
She's not a high schooler.
No.
Right, she is not a high schooler.
No.
And certainly, yes, lots, as we talked about at the time, lots of lap dances with the boobs, but no high schoolers. And, okay, well, let's start talking about Fast Times at Ridgemont High, because this, of course, is a film that, in so many ways, I mean, I think was super, super realistic for the period in which it was made. 1982? 1981, I think? We should have looked that up. And really shows, again, not a film that could be made today.
No.
Right? Absolutely not. But in terms of the character of Stacy, her friend Linda, whom we talked about last time, but specifically the way in which Stacy's sexuality and losing her virginity is talked about completely, right?
Yes.
Could not be done today.
Yes. It could not be done today for reasons that are still unclear to me, even the conversation. But at least the way that it is depicted, with Linda saying, "Oh, just get it over." When I was 13. I was 13. You're at the ripe age lady. Of 15. You're a hag. Just go do it. Just get it over with. Have sex with Ron, the stereo salesman, who is 26 years old. And that'll be great, and then you'll be able to move on to other relationships and basically bonk the rest of the school. And there's no
other guys you meet at the mall.
Yeah, and there's really not going to be any repercussions for this, and there's no discussion with Stacy and Linda about STDs or birth control or anything like that.
And there should have been.
And there should have been.
But this is something else, of course, and we talked about this a little bit before, where the total absence of parents, is particularly germane, right? So we're not having any kind of sit down, right, between Stacy and her mom, you know, let's talk about the first time, and let's talk about birth control, and let's talk about STDs.
Or even with Brad.
I mean, which does make sense. I mean, again, she's a sophomore in high school, right? She's not necessarily going to talk about sort of her sexual life until eventually he has to help her, get back home from the abortion. But that, I do think that is shockingly realistic. Right?
Yes,
And that
it
everything Stacy knows is coming from this older girlfriend.
And
right?
from mall culture
And from
in
mall
general.
culture.
From the other girls who work in the pizza place, who are like, oh, I'll take him if you're not
Yeah.
going to take him. And her girlfriends,
And kids, other girls in high school, right? The older girls, we see she's paying attention to the older girls, how they're trying to look sexy, right? The ones
Right.
who look like Pat Benatar.
Right.
And
Right.
this is very much on her radar screen.
But it is the thing that's the most insane and would never happen today is that I clocked it. It really was within the first 15 minutes of the movie. Stacy met Ron.
Yeah.
Stacy got in Ron's car, and Stacy and Ron go to the point where they have sex. And that happens right away.
Immediately.
And there's no, of course, and this is problematic, there is no conversation between Stacy and Ron about what's going to happen.
He does ask, right, if she is 18. Right. He does say, are you 18? And of course she lies.
Right.
And tells him that.
Right.
But yes, but there's no conversation about birth control, about are we going to have sex?
Are you a virgin?
Are you a virgin? But again, he's assuming that she's 18.
Right.
So as far as he knows, right, she's been having sex for the past 5 years, right? Since she was 13, like Linda.
Like Linda, right.
So, right?
Right.
Why would you assume that an 18-year-old in California in 1981 was a virgin, right? It would be like the 35-year-old people that we're seeing on that television
on the show. Right.
On the
Right.
show.
So he assumes, of course, she goes through with it, and she is doing as Linda told her to do, which is get it over with, and wouldn't say enjoy, but go through with it.
Go through with it.
And he drops her off, and she expects that this will lead to some sort of relationship, which, surprise, surprise,
It does not.
it does not. She does get some flowers, which is an interesting touch.
It is.
Thinking of you, Ron. It's interesting that he's, kind of forked over for the flowers. But it doesn't lead to the outcome that she is expecting, and then it's on to the next.
And so I would argue that Stacy has the two most depressing sex scenes in the entirety of American cinematic history.
Oh.
So she has two sex scenes in the film, right? So we have with Ron in a baseball dugout, right, where the camera dwells upon like the graffiti.
Yeah,
right. It's so again, she's on this like bench or whatever, right? It's so depressing.
So depressing.
We are the exact opposite of Brenda and Dylan, right?
Yes.
In the fantastic suite or wherever they, during the prom.
Right.
And then of course we have the equally terrible scene in the cabana at her own house in the afternoon after school with Damone, where again there's no conversation about birth control.
Right.
And again there's no conversation of like, oh, are we going to do this thing or not?
Right.
Right. It's 0 to 60 in both cases.
Right.
And where
Yes, and the other scene in the middle, which isn't a full-on sex scene, but it's her hope that Rat is going to do something with her.
Something.
They come back from the date. She changes into a bathrobe. They go into her room. They start to kiss a little bit, and then he gets so nervous and runs out. And which is a normal reaction as well.
Yeah.
And she takes it as rejection, and she is bummed out, and then goes from that experience to Damone, which is again 0 to 60.
0 to 60.
And without conversation either. Without Stacy and Rat saying, hey, really enjoyed the date. Sorry I had to leave. I'd like to see you again. And then maybe the next time they see each other, they're able to make out a little bit longer, that sort of thing. But it never happens.
It never happens. And he then, of course, shows his true colors by, in effect, hiding when she needs the abortion.
Right.
And so if we think about it, so Stacy in the film, Stacy has sex 2 times.
Right.
And gets pregnant
The
second time she has sex. So in a sense, she's sort of proving almost true, right? The 1950s horror stories, right? Of like, don't lose your virginity. Wait until you're married because you might get pregnant, right? The very first time you do it.
Right.
And it's the second. And so in terms of sort of her kind of sexual development, losing her virginity, it's basically the worst case scenario.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The only thing that could be possibly worse is actually another movie about someone losing virginity is Metropolitan. I don't know if you ever saw Whit Stillman's Metropolitan, but Chloe Sevigny loses her virginity and actually gets like herpes the very first time that she has sex, right? Again, so that's also sort of a worst case scenario. But Stacy is fulfilling, right, this goal to sort of be mature, to be sexually mature. But we as viewers see what is, again, so depressing, so sad. And
but as you said before, the other problem with this is that her sounding board is Linda, who just says, keep doing it again, it'll feel better.
Yeah.
Me and Doug have this amazing sex life. You never see him. He's some older, experienced man. And if you just keep going it's gonna be great. And she never has an adult to talk to, at least shown to us, about anything that has been going on with her. And she has the abortion, she leaves, and then moves on. And it's really, really heartbreaking in a lot of ways that you don't see the kind of processing, you don't see the kind of emotional journey for her. And if that movie were made today, and of course there have been other movies about these topics and other whatever serial dramas or whatever where we see long episodes of people thinking about these issues. Stacy, again, in this movie that is an hour and a half, is sort of in and out, so to speak, in most situations.
But then you also have sort of the idea at the end, right, that she and Rat are going to pursue a relationship, but that it's a chaste one, right? So the choices that the movie presents us in terms of Stacy, right, absolutely miserable sexual experiences, right, totally void of any romantic or emotional attachment, or this kind of sweet relationship with Rat that first becomes, as you say, as he runs out, it becomes, again, sort of doesn't work. But then at the end, they're dating and chaste, right? So there's no Catherine and Michael moment, right? Where these things come together. The sexual relationship with this deep emotional connection. But I also think, thinking about Forever as being, 1975 or whatever. So you do have this moment, right, in Forever. She can talk to her grandmother about birth control. She can talk to her mom. But of course, Catherine is not Gen X.
No.
Right? Catherine is not Gen X. Whereas Stacy is
very
Gen
much,
X.
very
right?
much.
And so it makes, this is why I say, it makes perfect sense to me. No parents, no conversation, no supervision, right? Gen X just completely left on its own, right, to try to negotiate this with Linda, right, as the adult in the room, and her, 25-year-old boyfriends or whatever. And so I do think, right, as dark and depressing as Stacy's experience is, it is this wonderful, so perfect Gen X moment of sexuality.
Especially in comparison, again, to the generation after, which is Jim and his friends. By the time then, you have Eugene Levy parenting, you have, looks like other parents.
You have the internet.
The internet, you have other adults on the scene in the film where... again, you have Stifler's mom.
You have Stifler's mom.
Who, I mean, again, might be acting completely inappropriately, but she is around. And the idea that you have adults on the scene in that film in ways that you have no adults except for Mr. Hand and the other teacher.
The other creepy teacher.
And Ron.
Ron.
All these people who are in some ways preying on the students in different ways. Not Mr. Hand, but again, just completely skeevy. That is such an 80s thing to portray, and again, that's why the movie works so well.
Yeah, I agree.
And again, we think back to Risky Business. No parents at home.
No parents at home.
There are
on purpose.
On purpose.
And and what's interesting about, Risky Business, of course, is interesting in that you have the whole dynamic of Justin and Keisha, where are we getting into college, right? The mom in Risky Business is basically Justin's mom, right? Can you take your SATs again, right? Can you do this extracurricular activity? You have to get into Princeton, right? The guy is going to come here to do the interview. And yes, so you have the absence of the parents, which sets up the whole plot in terms of turning the house into a whorehouse. But you absolutely have this sense of sort of, in that case, right, 1980s materialism.
Yes.
Everyone needs to get into Harvard or Princeton, so they become bankers and hedge fund managers.
Sure.
And this sense of this really kind of oppressive parental thing. And that, of course, in that case, that Joel is terrified to have sex.
Right.
Because he sees losing his virginity as losing his future, right? And losing
Right.
success.
Right.
Which, of course, we don't have in Forever the series, even though we do have the overbearing mother and you have to get into a great college and here's your tutors and all this other sort of stuff.
Right.
So I guess just to return, we're pretty much out of time, but just to return for 1 minute to Brenda and Dylan at the prom. But if you think about it, but that also then is a kind of Gen X moment, right? A sort of younger Gen X, but still where, so Brenda's not talking about it with her mom ahead of time, right? She is talking with her friends, but then it kind of goes sideways almost immediately when she thinks she might be pregnant, right? And then the parents come in.
Then they come in,
and
then she and Dylan are sitting on the cliffside and in the car
listening to "Losing My Religion" by R.E.M.
and she's like, I can't handle this.
I can't handle this.
This is too much for me.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting way to think about the weight of what has just happened to her in a way that, again, it didn't happen for Stacy.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, we don't see that weight later with Keisha. And we do see it with Catherine.
Very much so. Yeah.
So it's, again, generationally speaking, this moment has very, very different meanings.
And it's also interesting, kind of sad, and I think this is something we should talk about in a future episode. You know, thinking about Fast Times at Ridgemont High coming out in the early 80s, of course you did have these sort of Brooke Shields moments, right? A film in the 1970s, like Blue Lagoon, like Pretty Baby, right? Where these super, super young girls that she is playing are losing their virginity, right? In very, in some ways, disturbing ways. You know, something I do think we need the dedicated Brooke Shields episode.
Yes, we will.
But in that sense, right, Stacy, you know, in the baseball dugout or whatever, that almost looks okay, right, compared to some of the things that we saw in films in the 1970s.
Right.
And and maybe we can table that for another time. But it is interesting to think how culturally, generationally, all of these things about losing virginity change so radically, but still it is so appealing. And it is interesting to think about if there is a Gen Z movie, something other than Forever, about losing one's virginity, what would that even look like, right? What would that even look like? And I can't even imagine.
No.
It's impossible.
It is. And it's hard to imagine. The one thing that I would say, maybe the Gen Z version, and this is, again, for another, would be that it would be a non-heteronormative experience. That it is more common to see queer films where people lose their virginity or are coming into their own later on than it is for heterosexual couples at this particular moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's something for us to talk about in the future.
Okay.
Well, that is it for this episode, and we will look forward then, Lauren, to next time.
And until then,
Harpies out.